Coming up, the latest on the government shutdown. How will it impact the 2014 midterm elections?
And Talking Points' Carolyn Blackburn sits down with an SU professor about the ongoing situation in Syria.
Also tonight, the latest on the debt ceiling, a view from both sides of the aisle on what exactly Republicans and Democrats want.
And Citrus TV's John Tomino and Carolyn Blackburn join our roundtable discussion. All that and more. Talking Points starts right now. Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Talking Points. I'm Nick Cardona.
And I'm Anna Giles. The government shutdown is in full swing, and that's our first talking point. It's been 10 days since the government shut down operation. While there's been communication between representatives from both sides of the aisle, a deal has not been reached. 800,000 government employees are still furloughed. Museums, monuments, and parks, they're still closed. And the American people say both major parties are to blame. A new CNN poll shows that 63% of Americans are angry at GOP politicians over how they've handled the shutdown. But 57% of Americans say they're angry at Democrats as well. And as the days count up on the shutdown, they also count down to the debt ceiling. Do we have a deal? Maybe. U.S. Republicans have offered President Obama a short-term debt limit increase to prevent default. Speaker of the House John Boehner said they would do so in exchange for negotiations with the White House to end a government shutdown. The United States is a mere 7 days away from running out of money to pay for its everyday expenses. Just being that close to default was enough to shake the global stock markets, with the Dow Jones already falling 1%. According to President Obama, if a deal isn't reached by October 17th, the full faith and credit of the U.S. is at stake.
Now remember, this whole shutdown came about due to the Republican opposition to President Obama's Affordable Care Act becoming enacted. The act, known to most people as Obamacare, has been a point of contention in the argument over both the shutdown and the debt ceiling. House Speaker John Boehner refused to talk about budget concessions with Democrats unless Obamacare was either scrapped or postponed. But now it's live, active, and off to a rocky start. Many websites malfunctioned when the service was rolled out on October 1st, and they continue to do so to this day, but insurers say improvements will be made soon. Now, the debt ceiling limit may be approaching fast, but 2016 will be here sooner than you think. And while you think the two subjects might not be related, the decisions made by Republicans and Democrats now could affect the way their parties are perceived for the next few years. A recent Quinnipiac University poll shows that former Secretary of State and First Lady Hillary Clinton leads potential Democratic candidates. The poll indicates 61% of Democrats surveyed favor her over Vice President Joe Biden and U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. As for Republicans, U.S. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky has a slight lead over New Jersey Governor Chris Christie and U.S. Senator Marco Rubio of Florida. And turning our eyes away from the U.S. and over to Syria, international forces continue the planning of the disposal of President Bashar al-Assad's chemical weapons deposit. The head of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons announced recently that more inspectors were on the way to expand the process. Secretary of State John Kerry said recently that he is pleased with how al-Assad's regime has been cooperating with international investigators. He also said he hopes the UN will set up a Syria peace conference for sometime in November. Syria reportedly has an estimated 1,000 tons worth of chemical weapons.
This morning I had a chance to speak with Speaker Boehner, and I told him what I've been saying publicly, that I am happy to talk with him and other Republicans about anything. Not just issues I think are important, but also issues that they think are important.
We're going to move now to our In Focus segment. Anna, I have to ask about 2016. I know it's far way away, and everybody hates us reporters who go in and talk about 2016 presidential election, but what is this government shutdown? What are the implications for 2016?
Right. The government shutdown, if you look at this internationally, it's almost unheard of. The U.S. is one of the only countries that has something like this, and it ends up being political warfare. Everyone's trying to get their piece of the pie. What we've seen in media framing is that, it's the Republicans trying to get their stake on Obamacare. And, we've had some, prime 2016 candidates come out here and try and get their piece in, Paul Ryan as well as Ted Cruz, who was on the Senate floor for over 20 hours trying to filibuster this. And it's all, what did that do? Not much, really. He was just trying to get his message out there, get his name out there. A lot of people say it didn't work. He ended up, forcing a vote that sided with Democrats.
It wasn't
anyway.
even technically a filibuster.
Exactly.
By rules of the Senate.
Exactly. A lot of people are, criticizing Ted Cruz right now, and he's in the running. His name has been thrown out for 2016, as we've seen, and he's a young senator, so he's not, a prime candidate here. But people have really they've come down on him for this whole. He's used this entire shutdown to try and raise his name out there, get his status up. Where and then Paul Ryan, we recently saw come back out in an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal where he got some fire for not mentioning Obamacare, seemed to side on something that would just get us through this shutdown without tying Obamacare to it. But, again, 2016 is far away. The close-up thing here is the 2014 midterms.
The 2014 midterm elections, you're looking at, if the Republicans can take over the Senate, that's what they're going to try to do in 2014. But I honestly don't think that they can do that with their approval rating down to an all-time low of 28% among Americans. So that's going to be difficult for them to take over the Senate. Now, the Democrats, they can even try to take over the House. So that's going to be an interesting piece. Now, I want to talk about Hillary Clinton and the Democrats on their side of the aisle for 2016. Who do you think is the front runner?
Like you said, the Democrats have a big chance here just because of how the Republicans have been doing. We're seeing divides. We're seeing people like John McCain separate themselves almost. So, some focus has been on Hillary here. And the big question is, are we ready for Hillary? Is Hillary going to happen? And, she still hasn't come out and said anything. And honestly, I think that makes a statement in and of itself that she hasn't come out and said no, flat out. So, when it comes to Hillary, I think she's going to have, when she makes her statement, whether or not she's going to run for president, that's going to have a huge implications for both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party because everyone's strategizing right now. So, we've got Biden who might, we'll see. It's going to have a big impact.
We'll see what happens. We just love talking about it.
Thanks, Nick. And coming up next, we take a look at the debt ceiling and talks up on Capitol Hill.
And we take a look at what is making headlines at the White House with our weekly briefing. And our very own Carolyn Blackburn sits down with an SU professor to talk about the ongoing crisis in Syria. You're watching Talking Points only on Citrus TV.
We are one tonight, and we're breathing in the same air. So turn up the love.
I'm Amanda Harry. I'm Rachel Wallspeed.
I'm Chris Wilner,
And I'm Anna Giles.
and this is Citrus TV.
Americans expect us to work out our differences, but refusing to negotiate is an untenable position.
Welcome back. That was Speaker of the House John Boehner on the debt ceiling. Clearly, budget issues in Washington are far from over. If you thought the government shutdown was chaotic, there's a bigger and much darker cloud ahead. The government has until October 17th to raise the U.S. debt ceiling, or how much it can borrow, or face default. Here's the breakdown. Reaching the debt ceiling poses a much bigger economic problem than the government shutdown. The U.S. spends a lot more than it takes in. The ongoing deficit adds to the overall debt, but Congress sets a cap on how much debt the U.S. can build up. Right now, that's $16.7 trillion. Well, we've reached that ceiling, and it must be raised or the U.S. faces default on its payments.
Defaulting our debt will risk millions of Americans' jobs, not thousands, not tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, millions of jobs.
It's a bit like using a credit card to pay for essential goods like groceries or a car payment, but then not paying the bill when it comes at the end of the month. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew appeared on CNN's State of the Union this week and claimed that if the debt ceiling isn't raised by the 17th, the U.S. will have only $30 billion to pay its bills, which nowhere near covers it. Lew was unclear about how the default would affect government programs. Many Republicans remained skeptical of its severity. What Lew did say was that a default has the potential to be catastrophic. Credit markets could freeze, the value of the dollar could plummet, and U.S. interest rates could skyrocket. This default situation almost happened back in 2011, and just the threat of default resulted in the U.S. credit rating being downgraded as well as a major fall in the stock market.
Turning now to the latest on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Speaker of the House John Boehner outlined his plans to propose a new increase to the nation's borrowing limit. This measure of compromise by the Speaker will extend the debt ceiling deadline to November 22nd to avoid the United States defaulting on its loans. House Republicans led by Speaker Boehner want the President and Republican leadership to sit down and develop a plan to reopen the government, at least temporarily. The view from the White House is a little brighter than in previous weeks. White House spokesperson Jay Carney said the president is happy that the Republican-led House is starting to work with the White House in order to avoid defaulting. Before meeting with the House Republicans to talk about any changes to Obamacare, President Obama wants a debt ceiling increase and temporary spending that would end the shutdown. In Thursday's White House briefing, Carney was questioned by reporters about the bill that could be introduced, and Carney straight away saying these are, quote, a lot of questions about a bill that may or may not exist.
And as the government shutdown loomed on September 30th, both parties did find something they could agree on. Late Monday morning, President Obama signed a law that passed the House unanimously, the Pay Our Military Act. After signing the law, the president spoke to U.S. troops.
As President and as your Commander-in-Chief, I've worked to make sure you have the strategy, the resources, and the support you need to complete the missions our nation asks of you. And every time, you've met your responsibilities and performed with extraordinary professionalism, skill, and courage.
So under the new law, who is still on the job? All 1.4 million active duty troops are still receiving their paychecks. Beyond that, things get a little less clear. 400,000 Department of Defense civilians continue to work, while another 400,000 have been sent home. But even a partial shutdown of the DoD impacts more than just its employees. A lot of the Defense Department's business is done by contractors, private companies that are hired to do a specific job. Last year, about 10% of the total federal budget was devoted to these defense contracts, or $360 billion.
The Pay Our Military Act allows the DoD to continue paying private contractors who are, quote, providing support for the members of the armed forces, but doesn't get more specific. It will be up to the Defense Secretary, Chuck Hagel, to decide which contracts are funded. For companies working on projects that aren't deemed essential, some combination of partial payment, forced vacation, and furloughs for employees is the standard.
And I know this comes on top of the furloughs that many of you already endured this summer. You and your families deserve better than the dysfunction we're seeing in Congress. Your talents and dedication help keep our military the best in the world. That's why I'll keep working to get Congress to reopen our government and get you back to work as soon as possible.
But for contractors, as soon as possible may not be soon enough. In 1996, projects that weren't funded during the shutdown did not get reimbursed once the government reopened. While government employees will eventually get their missed paychecks, in the private sector, that money is just gone. And right now, it is impossible to know what kind of economic impact that will have on a regional economy that is largely supported by the contracting business. With the ongoing situation in Syria making headlines around the world, our very own Carolyn Blackburn sat down with an SU professor with a unique perspective on the Assad regime.
Even my elementary school, I used to go to a private school that belongs to the Orthodox Church. So the school and the church were in the same yard. Not one stone left unturned. It's my elementary school, my church, which I used to go to.
How does that make you feel?
I really felt so upset at the time, and I put it on my Facebook page. And I just said, this is my elementary school, and everybody was so sad when they saw that. And so now the whole area, not only they control it, but it's almost totally destroyed. All the old churches, it has also one of the oldest churches that has the original girdle of the Virgin Mary. It has been destroyed. The violence that's coming from the government is not more than the violence that is coming from the other side. So there is equal violence going on there. And who's actually suffering at the end? The people of Syria. And nobody is taking this into consideration, and so I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think, and in both cases, I think the Syrian people are still going to be suffering. I had Muslim friends, I had Alawite friends. We were very close friends, and we never thought oh, she's a Muslim, she's a Christian, she's an Alawite. And that's how we lived throughout, my childhood, throughout my college and so on. So I'm afraid right now things are changing to become more sectarian now. You feel like people are talking more about religion.
Carolyn, very interesting work. That interview was really compelling. She had an amazing story. Now, I want to ask one question. Are Christians the only groups being impacted in this situation?
No, it's really a lot of religious minorities in Syria that are being targeted. It's Christians, it's Alawites, it's Jews. It's just that a lot of the times Christians are being targeted because they're merchants in the area, and so they make a lot of money. And the rebels can take them and kidnap them, and then they get ransom money.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and in this conflict, we see a lot of numbers, Carolyn, and it's more personal than that. Can you kind of give us the family backside of our interviewee and tell us a little bit about some of her sufferings, and her family over there?
Yeah, I mean, 2 years ago she just had a nephew born, and then 10 days ago she had a niece born, and she hasn't been able to meet either of them. Usually she tries to go back to Syria once a year, and she hasn't been back in 2 years, and it breaks her heart. She's so upset that she can't meet these new members of her family, and she only gets to see them through Facebook.
And she must be so worried every single day. Syria, the conflict is at a point where every day brings something new, and she must feel so worried from what we saw in that interview. It's amazing.
That crisis is just it's affecting so many people and so many families. So,
exactly.
But we'll monitor it as the situation goes.
Exactly. Hope it can get better.
That's right.
Thanks, Carolyn. And coming up next, we're talking shutdown, Obamacare, and Syria with our roundtable panel of experts.
Citrus TV's John Tomino and Carolyn Blackburn join us in studio with their take on the top stories of the week. Stay tuned. You're watching Talking Points on Citrus TV.
I wanna go crazy. You can go crazy too. I wanna go crazy. Wanna go crazy with you. Everybody say whoa.
I'm Russell Oliver.
I'm Maddie Olaskevich.
I'm Irfan Urazi.
And I'm Alex Resnick.
And this is Citrus TV
News.
Welcome back. Joining us now, Citrus TV's political analyst John Tomino and Talking Points political correspondent Carolyn Blackburn. Guys, welcome.
Thanks for having us. We're good to be here.
All right. So now the first topic I want to jump into, and I want to direct it to Anna, about the government shutdown, its implications, its effects. How is it going to take a toll on the American people?
Exactly, Nick. This shutdown is costing us $160 million a day, according to stats by Bloomberg.
It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable, and the effects are broad and wide. That you can't pinpoint, one exact effect of this shutdown. It's affecting every government department there is. And some of the big ones I want to point out are the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and I'm sure people have seen the news, the salmonella outbreak in California. Well, they had to pull inspectors out of furlough it's just things. And then also another big one, Department of Homeland Security's E-Verify program. That's for illegal immigrants coming across the border trying to verify, their legal status. It's programs that like that are, just the effects are spread wide out. NASA, that's another big one where scientists from there have been furloughed, or it's messing up, expeditions in space. Again, I don't want to get too much into detail on the exact effect, but it's just far and wide throughout this entire, the entire shutdown is.
You're completely right, and it's amazing because the effects go from so large to so tiny. You have literal 800,000 workers or something like that are out of a job, that are not reporting for work, or if they are reporting for work, if they're an essential personnel, they're not getting paid to keep the country running at the rate that it's supposed to be running.
Now the thing is that this whole thing came about as a result of Obamacare. I mean, the Republicans are shutting down the government because of Obamacare. That's the argument many people are making. Carolyn, what can you tell us about the implications of Obamacare? I mean, you spent some time in Washington over the summer. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that Obamacare really goes to the core of both of the parties as far as government involvement. Like, Democrats are very much for government involvement, Republicans are not. So I think that's the reason why the parties are so polarized on the issue of Obamacare, because it really gets to the core of their party's beliefs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, exactly. I know it's very much a political game here that they're trying to use. And whether Obamacare, there's been arguments it hasn't even been in effect yet. How can people make analysis? And Obamacare is another big complicated issue in and of itself, where yes, it benefits some people, and this is according to a report from the Congressional Budget Office. So so this is nonpartisan. They do, portray themselves as nonpartisan. Is that, some people are really benefiting from Obamacare, while others just are, like small businesses are, laying off workers because they can't afford health insurance. It's kind of like the shutdown in a way, where the effects are broad and wide on
The
that.
thing is, most people don't have to worry about the effects of Obamacare because most Americans already have health insurance. A large majority do. And for those people, Obamacare literally means nothing because you're already insured, you're paying your money to your insurance provider, and you're getting care. A lot of this also has to do, though, with a non-political factor. It's more of a human factor. It's just sheer hubris. The fact that John Boehner is in office as the Speaker of the House representing a minority party in our government and trying to make sure that the voices of his constituents and the people that support the Republican Party as a whole their voices are being advocated. But at the same time, what he may be doing is actually hurting the image of the party.
Now, I want to talk about, obviously, potential candidates. 2014, we touched on it earlier in the broadcast about 2014, the midterm elections, how that's going to how this government shutdown is going to have an effect on the Republicans' ability to take back the Senate or the Democrats' ability to take back the House. So I want to point to 2016 now, because that's, we love to talk about potential presidential elections.
Of course.
Now, John, I know you've been doing some research about Ted Cruz and his sudden emergence, after the filibuster or the fake filibuster.
It's really interesting. Ted Cruz has just gone from another junior senator from Texas to this national figure in recent weeks.
Making headlines everywhere.
Exactly. It all started with his kind of pseudo filibuster that he had, but there's real traction that's gaining behind him. But the thing to keep in mind is that he almost is being portrayed as one of the Tea Party's most radical members at this point, and that Democrats especially are using Ted Cruz and trying to blanket him to represent the views of all GOP members. The Virginia governor's race, which is going on right now, the Republican candidate happened to be giving a speech at a gala where Ted Cruz was, and Democrats instantly attacked him, put out political ads and the such, criticizing him and trying to align him with Ted Cruz's views, even though that may not be it. So what Democrats are essentially trying to do is they're trying to force the Republican Party's hand either to sever all ties with Ted Cruz, which will alienate one block of voters, or to adopt and say, he represents us. He's a member of the Republican Party. Either way, it seems like right now it's a lose-lose for Republicans.
Exactly. And, he's already parting from major. He didn't go with Rubio's plan on immigration. He hasn't, Paul Ryan hasn't supported his, big war against Obamacare and the entire shutdown. So he's separated himself a lot from Republicans.
Now, in the short time we have left, I want to talk about an article that I came across today about a Republican strategist said that Ted Cruz, is the de facto leader of the GOP. So that's an interesting fact that I wanna bring up. But we are out of time. Thank you, guys. John, Carolyn, you're going to stick around with us, obviously. But thank you very much for being with us. When we come back, Anna and I go in depth on our most important issues in our open-end segment. We'll be right back.
We are one tonight, and we're breathing in the same air. So turn up the love.
I'm Amanda Harry. I'm Rachel Walsby.
I'm Chris Wilner.
And I'm Anna Giles.
And this is Citrus TV.
Welcome back. After talking so much about the 2014 midterm elections, here's a poll that should awaken some Republicans who are up for re-election in just under a year. A new Gallup poll has the favorability of the grand old party down to an all-time low of 28%. Just this month, the approval of the Republican Party has dropped nearly 10 points. On the other side of the aisle, favorability of the Democrats has dropped 4 points this month to 43%. Not as bad. This year is the first time the economy is not the main concern for the majority of Americans. 33% of the American people think the government shutdown is the main concern, while 19% think the economy is the main concern. So in other words, in my opinion, if the Republican Party wants to either take back the Senate in 2014 or win the White House in 2016, I would suggest they start working on opening the government back up.
Right, Nick. Like you mentioned, those poll numbers, it's not looking good for 2014 for them unless they get those up.
It is not.
And, moving on to international issue here, the overthrow of Egypt's President Mohamed Morsi just a couple months ago has quickly faded from major media coverage because the U.S. response was limited at first. The U.S. couldn't make up its mind about whether or not the overthrow was a coup, which would mean military aid would have to be discontinued. Well, now, 2 months later, the U.S. has quietly made a decision to suspend a large part of the $1.3 million in aid we give to Egypt. Understandably, Egyptian officials were not happy, but the U.S. made the right call. They should have done it sooner. Events like this set a precedent for future international action. The U.S., whether they like it or not, serves as a world policeman of sorts and has the responsibility to set a global standard. We should have suspended large amounts of military aid to Egypt within days of Morsi's overthrow and proposed to only give it back when a legitimate constitution was drafted. The Obama administration needs to be more decisive and consistent. Riding the fence will not work forever. Well, that about does it for this edition of Talking Points. I'm Anna Giles.
And I'm Nick Cardona. We hope to see you back here next week for the latest talking points on all things political. Have a good night, Syracuse.